What this video is going to discuss is just some different types of angles that can be congruent. We're really dealing with triangles and shapes this unit, but if you don't remember everything about angles and the different types of angles that can be congruent or are congruent, then you're going to have a hard time with some of the shapes that we're dealing with. So I just wanted to review. Remember, congruent means that they are exactly the same. Exact same shape, exact same size, that kind of deal. So congruent angles have the exact same degree measure. Different types of angles that we know will be congruent. You may remember if two lines intersect each other, then the angles that are right across from each other, we call these vertical angles. Those vertical angles are congruent. So this angle would be congruent to this angle, and this angle would be congruent to this angle. So vertical angles are congruent, and we know that. Other types of angles that we happen to know are congruent, a lot of them have to do with parallel lines. All right, so if you happen to have two lines that are parallel, and don't forget we mark lines as being parallel with kind of like the little arrow on them. So if you have a line with the little arrow, and then I have a line with the little arrow, then that symbol means that these lines are parallel. If you have another line that comes across it and intersects those lines that are parallel, we call this a transversal, in case you have forgotten that. Transversal. And it does create a lot of angles at the parallel lines. Specifically, I get 4 up here, and I get 4 down here. And these angles have a lot of special relationships. So we'll start with the ones that are inside the two parallel lines. So, for example, this angle is going to be congruent to this angle. And this angle is going to be congruent to that angle. We call these alternate interior angles. So they're alternate because they're on opposite sides of interior. I can't spell interior at the moment. They're inside the parallel lines, and they're on opposite sides of the transversal. I had one teacher explain it. If you can draw a Z or a backwards Z, you know, this creates a Z. So that angle and that angle have to be equal. The ones outside of that, they have to be equal. That draws a Z this way. So these have to be, and those have to be. They are congruent to each other. The same can be said for alternate exterior angles. So alternate exterior alternate exterior on opposite sides of the transversal, but outside of the parallel lines. So this angle is congruent to this angle, and this angle is congruent to that angle. So opposites on the outside, opposites on the outside, opposites on the inside, opposites on the inside. Those angles we know are congruent. There are some more angles that we know are congruent when we're dealing with parallel lines. So let's say I have parallel lines again, and then I have a transversal that goes through it. Other angles that we know are congruent are what we call corresponding. Corresponding angles are in the same spot at the other intersection. Because notice I have an intersection here with 4 angles, and I have an intersection here with 4 angles. So the ones that are in the same spot, this one's in the upper left side. The upper left side has to be equal to the one that's in the upper left side. Those would be corresponding. The upper right side would have to be congruent to the upper right side. The lower left side is going to have to be congruent to the other lower left side. And the lower right side is going to be congruent to the lower right side. And so those would be corresponding angles. Those are also congruent. These are all different types of angles that you want to keep in the back of your mind that are equal, because sometimes they don't mark these in pictures for you. You have to be paying attention to, oh, are there parallel lines here? because then I might have some equal angles. Oh, do I have some intersecting lines here? I might have some vertical angles, and that would mean that they're congruent. They're not always going to tell you that they're congruent. You have to be paying attention.